Hi, I'm Stephanie, and this is the Headlines and Tidbits podcast. Here, we dust off forgotten, bizarre, and unbelievable stories pulled straight from old newspapers. In each full episode, I take a single headline that caught my attention, something strange, unsettling, or just too compelling to ignore, and walk you through the real story behind it, the people involved, what happened, and how it unfolded. All right, let's get into today's headline. But today's headline isn't your typical crime or curiosity. It's one of those stories that sits somewhere between folklore and fear, the kind that makes you glance out your window just a little longer than usual at night. And this story comes from the quiet, wooded hills of Vermont, where locals whisper about a creature that's part man, part beast, and entirely a nightmare. They call him the Pigman of Northfield. Some say he's a ghost. Others swear he's real, a strange figure with the face of a pig and the body of a man seen lurking around farms and forests for decades. So let's dig into this legend and see where this strange story began. The headline that caught my attention, it comes from the Burlington Free Press out of Burlington, Vermont, and is dated April 26, 2021. And it reads, "Which monster lives close to you?" And this article is pretty cool. It even has a quote monster map for the state of Vermont. I'll post it up, but you can see the different monsters on the map. And this headline is what led me to discover the Pigman. And so there are a few variations for the origin of Pigman. And one of the most common stories is from 1971. One evening, a farmer in Northfield, he was just hanging out in his house when he heard some strange noises coming from outside. So the farmer turned on a light in his kitchen and looked out the window to see if he could figure out what was making the noise. He probably thought he would see a skunk or some type of varmint, but nope, he saw some figure that was as big as a man, but covered in hair and had the face of a pig. So the figure was lurking around his house and digging through his trash. Now, this is where I would tell the farmer to get a dog. My dog Benny would have been all over that, barking long before some weird figure got that close to the house. Just kidding. But Benny does bark quite a bit. So the question is, what in the world did this farmer see? The Pigman of Northfield, or sometimes called the Northfield Pigman, is a legend that has been told for years in the town of Northfield, Vermont. The Pigman has been described as having hoofs covered in white hair/fur, and even as having talon-like claws. But no matter how much the small details vary, everyone describes the figure as pig-like. And we just have to go off the testimony of those who have seen the Pigman because no photos have ever been taken of him. One of the earliest stories I found of Pigman was from Reddit, so take that with a grain of salt, I guess. The story goes in 1951, the night before Halloween, a 17-year-old boy, Sam Harris, went exploring the woods and the town with a basket of eggs to stir up some mischief. But Sam never returned home and was never seen again. Some speculate that the Pigman is Sam Harris. Some said that the devil possessed him that night and that he haunts towns. It is said that Sam slaughters pigs, hollows out the pig's head, and wears the head while terrorizing towns. Ugh. One of the most famous and frightening interactions with Pigman involved a group of teenagers hanging out at their high school. Apparently, Pigman was watching them, and he came out of the woods and ran straight towards them. The teenagers ran inside their high school and claimed that whatever discharged them was naked, covered in white fur, and had a pig face. I wonder if these kids were hanging outside of the high school because they were up to no good, maybe smoking something. Just kidding. And honestly, there are a couple of explanations for why the kids were hanging outside the high school. One story states that the kids were drinking at night during a school dance. Another says they were just hanging out, so who knows. Another version of this legend states that there was a pig farmer that lived in the forest outside of the town of Northfield. The farmer was a recluse and kept to himself, rarely interacting with the people of Northfield. But after a while, the town people started noticing some strange things going on at the farm. People started seeing strange ghost-like figures and hearing really strange sounds coming from the farm. Even some reported seeing the farmer walking through the forest at night carrying a large bag and wearing weird outfits. It's really creepy. One night, some teenagers decided that they wanted to investigate the farm and see if they could figure out all the strange happenings going on. They followed the trail that led from the town to the farmer's property, and when they got to the farm, they saw the farmer butchering one of his pigs. And it apparently was so frightening to these teenagers because they ran back to town completely freaked out. Now, I would be freaked out seeing a pig getting butchered too. Not to the point where I felt like I had to run for my life. And also he's a farmer. It might just be what he's doing, but it makes you wonder how bad this was or what they really saw. So like I said, the teenagers were so freaked out that when they got back to town, they went to the police and told them what they saw. So the police went out to the pig farm to investigate, but when they got there, the farm was apparently abandoned. The only thing that was left was a large pile of bones that they assumed were the bones of the pigs he had butchered. No one knows where he went or why he disappeared. And I wonder, did the farmer leave because the kids saw him? What was he doing that freaked the kids out so bad that they felt like they had to report it to the police? And the police went out there. Because if you were a kid and a teenager and you went to the police station and said, I snuck onto a farm and watched a farmer butcher a pig, I feel like maybe most police officers would be like, well, yeah, he's a farmer. I don't know. But why did he disappear? That's what's really weird. So a folklorist, Joseph Citro, went on the search for this abandoned farm. Joseph, he has written a lot of books that discuss the sightings of Pigman. And in case you want to read any of those books, the titles are Weird New England, Green Mountains, Dark Tales, and Vermont Horror Comics. But Joseph and some reporters from the Burlington Free Press went in search of the Pigman. And they went to a place called Devil's Washbowl, which is about 15 minutes away from Northfield. Apparently, in the Devil's Washbowl, there are caves that the Pigman has been reported to be hiding in. Along the way, they stopped by the abandoned farm to see if they could figure anything out. And this farm had a barn that was rusted with bent metal and walls with holes in them. And the farmhouse had broken windows and a boarded up entrance. Now, they didn't spot the Pigman that day, but everyone was apparently pretty creeped out after leaving the farm. So going back to the caves real quick, many people believe that Pigman actually lives in the caves. People have gone exploring the caves to see if they can catch a glimpse of Pigman. People have reported that they found piles of animal bones in some of the caves, and apparently some of the bones were pig bones, so that's weird. I found another story where some teenagers, they went up to the caves to camp and try to locate Pigman. And when they were rolling out their sleeping bags and trying to start fires, one of their friends started screaming. When they found her, she was curled up in the fetal position crying, and her boyfriend was nowhere to be found. She eventually told the rest of the group that she and her boyfriend were setting up camp when Pigman came walking into their cave, and Pigman was completely unaware and not really bothered by her and her boyfriend. But her boyfriend started yelling at it, and Pigman casually picked up a large rock, hit him over the head, then picked up her boyfriend and ran out of the cave. The other teens found the rock with blood on it and decided they needed to go get some help. Some of the girls drove into town to tell the authorities while the boys stayed at camp in case the boyfriend or the Pigman showed back up. Apparently, search parties were set up to look for the teenage boy. They did find some of his clothes at an abandoned farmhouse, not the same farmhouse, and apparently the clothes were torn to pieces, but the teen was never found. Now, this was a story that I found on Reddit again, so keep that in mind. One odd theory I ran across on how Pigman came to be was that the farmer got a little too close to his pigs, if you know what I mean, and Pigman was a result of this. So gross. The legend of Pigman, like many other legends, is often told as a cautionary tale to young children, warning them not to wander off into the woods alone. Some versions of the story say that the Pigman would kidnap or harm anyone who crossed his path, while others claim that he was simply a mischievous and playful creature. But let's end the telling of this legend with an episode from Seinfeld. And this episode is called The Briss. So Kramer goes into a hospital and he is looking for room 1397. He's there to visit a couple that had just had a baby, but he gets confused and starts looking for 1937 instead of 1397. When he finds room 1937, he walks in and he sees a tray of food and takes a sandwich off the tray. Then he decides to peek behind the curtain and is terrified by what he sees. He sees what he describes as Pigman. The man/pig behind the curtain starts making pig sounds and Kramer runs out of the room. Now, once Kramer finds the correct room, he bursts in and starts yelling about Pigman. Jerry, George, and Elaine are there and they're trying to tell him there is no such thing and he needs to basically shut up. Then later on, Kramer runs into Jerry's apartment waving a newspaper. He shows everyone that the paper has an article explaining that the hospital received a grant to do DNA research, and he's convinced that the government is behind it and may be making an army of pigmen. He even claims that the government has been experimenting on pigmen since the 1950s. So Kramer later takes Jerry to the hospital to prove to him that the pigman exists. But when they get to the room, no one is there. Kramer finds a doctor and freaks out on him trying to figure out where Pigman is. Jerry takes off to find George and Elaine, and later George and Elaine are standing in a hall at the hospital and they hear pig noises. And Kramer goes running by with a small looking man on his back. And so basically he steals this pigman. He found him. And the pigman ends up later stealing George's car. And then Kramer eventually realizes that he was wrong and admits that the pigman is, quote, a fat little mental patient. So Pigman even found his way into pop culture. So while the pigman may have captivated imaginations and haunted the dreams of locals, it appears that the truth behind this creature is far less sinister. It's likely that the legend of the pigman served as a cautionary tale, warning children from the woods. But as we close this chapter of the pigman, we are left with a valuable lesson about the power of folklore. These tales, even though they can be a little crazy at times, they often hold kernels of truth, revealing deeper insights into the fears, beliefs, and cultural heritage of a community. And that's where we will leave today's story. Thank you so much for listening to Headlines and Tidbits. If you enjoyed this episode, consider following or subscribing so you don't miss future stories pulled from the pages of the past. See you next time.